So we will go over the hemoglobin and oxygen transport, and then similarly how carbon dioxide transport. So we'll go over gas exchange in the lungs, measurement of blood PO2 and blood PCO2, which is partial pressure of oxygen and carbon dioxide, both voluntary and involuntary regulation of breathing, and then transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide by hemoglobin and in other forms like dissolved in plasma. Okay, so let's start with the gas exchange in the lungs. Uh, the gas, when we talk about gas, air is a gas and it is a combination of gas. So the what are the composition of our atmospheric air? It contains oxygen, nitrogen, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and they all are mixers. So this air is mixture of several gases. And when we, let's see, when we measure alcohol or any alcohol drink, what we say, how much percentage of alcohol inside it, like concentration of alcohol in a solution. So for example, beer has only 5% alcohol. Whiskey has like 42% alcohol, and we call it concentration. Same thing, what is the concentration of oxygen or carbon dioxide or nitrogen in our air? And that is the concentration, but it is not measured in the form of concentration. We measure it in the form of partial pressure of that particular gas, because it is partial pressure of gas differences in the lungs, in the tissues, which helps in diffusion of gas across the membrane in the body. That's why we measure partial pressure of gas. So partial pressure of a gas in air is particularly partial concentration of that gas in the air. Okay, so partial pressure is the pressure that our particular gas in a mixture exerts independently. So let's see the atmospheric pressure at sea level. The atmospheric pressure at Fisherman Wharf in San Francisco is 760 millimeter of mercury. But that pressure, 760 millimeter of mercury, is by combining all the gases. Nitrogen, which is 78%, oxygen, which is 21%, carbon dioxide, which is 0.0 something percent, very low, some maybe other gases, trace gases. So we combine all of them. Among these all gases, what is the pressure of particular gas? One gas. That is called partial pressure. So like the pressure exerted exclusively by oxygen is partial pressure of oxygen. So let's see, if 21% of oxygen is in the air and 760 is the total pressure, what will be the partial pressure? So that means what is the 21% of 760 millimeter of mercury? Can anybody calculate on your cell phone? It will be around 20, like 160, around 160 millimeter of mercury. Are you following me? So that is the partial pressure of oxygen. Deeper you go, higher the pressure. Let's see, diving people go inside, the pressure of oxygen will go up. If you go high in the mountains, the pressure will drop. That's why pressure of oxygen is lighter air. We call it lighter air on the mountains, because the pressure of that particular gas is lowered when you climb up. Okay. So Dalton's law states that total pressure of a gas mixture is the sum of partial pressure of each gas in the mixture. Atmospheric pressure at sea level is 760 millimeter of mercury, and that is PATM, partial pressure of atmosphere, which is partial pressure of nitrogen, plus partial pressure of oxygen, plus partial pressure of carbon dioxide. And in the air, we are always water vapor, and that also exerts some partial pressure. But if you add them all, it is 760 millimeter of mercury. Okay. So let's see here. Partial pressure. Here it is inspired. When you inhale air, that is inspired air. And here is when air get inside your alveoli. So before air, when you inhale from your nose, before it get into your alveoli, it has to pass through several conducting zone, and then it reaches the alveoli. Okay. So let's compare here. Partial pressure of H2O is variable. If there is, like, if you go to Florida and in spring, you will have a lot of partial pressure of water. So that will vary. If you go to Death Valley, which is very dry, partial pressure will be low of water. That's why it is variable. But partial pressure of water in your alveoli is 47 millimeter of mercury, because our alveoli and our respiratory tract, warm air, put water, if it is hot, cool down, if it's cold, put the heat and brings it to the body temperature. That's why they adding water ultimately makes 47 millimeter of mercury. Carbon dioxide, 0.3 millimeter of mercury. In the alveoli, it is 40 millimeter of mercury. Why? Because this alveoli you have seen in the previous lecture is covered by pulmonary capillaries, and carbon dioxide diffuse here and mix with the atmospheric air. That's why it is 40 millimeter of mercury. Oxygen, 159, as I said earlier, is around 160. So 159 millimeter of mercury. But when it goes into your alveoli, it is low now. Why? Because oxygen from here will diffuse into the pulmonary capillaries. Why they diffuse? Due to the pressure gradient, because the pressure of oxygen is more in the alveoli and less in the pulmonary capillaries. Nitrogen, it is pretty much same. It's some dissolve in your plasma and some diffuse, get into and come back, but it doesn't do anything in our body. So total at the alveoli level, pretty much same. Okay. So how gas exchange takes place in the alveoli? Now you need to integrate your knowledge of cardiovascular system here to understand the function of respiratory system. So here blood is coming through the pulmonary arteriole. Pulmonary arteriole is the branch of which artery?
Pulmonary artery.
Pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery is attached to which chamber of the heart?
Right.
Right ventricle.
Right ventricle. Right ventricle receives deoxygenated blood or oxygenated blood?
Deoxygenated.
Deoxygenated.
Deoxygenated blood. So deoxygenated blood, you see, that's why it is blue. Blue blood is coming, branches ultimately into, you see here, pulmonary arteriole, and then pulmonary arteriole branches into capillaries, and which make a network of capillaries around the alveoli, each alveoli. So there is like millions of alveoli, and there is millions of pulmonary arteriole, which is making branches. And the size of these capillaries are like 7 micrometer, very small. So This pulmonary arteriole is rich in carbon dioxide because carbon dioxide has high partial pressure here because this is carrying venous blood. So venous blood then get rid of carbon dioxide. Where does carbon dioxide enter then? Inside the alveoli. And then in the alveoli, we have inhaled air, which has oxygen. So oxygen has a higher partial pressure. That's why oxygen diffuse from the alveoli into these capillaries. That's why after oxygen, getting oxygen, this blue blood is slowly becoming like pinky purple and then pinkish red because this is oxygenated blood. And now pulmonary capillaries becomes pulmonary venules, then pulmonary vein, and we have four pair of pulmonary vein, two right and two left. These pulmonary vein then carry oxygenated blood to which part of the heart?
Left ventricle.
Left ventricle first. First it goes to left atrium and then left ventricle, and from the left ventricle you transport blood through the aorta all over the body. And again, aorta becomes thousands of branching and becomes the capillaries, and they become like this one, but in the tissue. Are you following me? So let me draw here a little bit. So once it comes here in the tissue, let's see here is the tissue cells. And then this capillaries, pulmonary capillaries, here. This is the pulmonary capillaries. P, C, here. So let's see in the pulmonary capillaries, the pulmonary venule, and then it takes it, becomes the systemic capillaries. This was the pulmonary capillaries. So it is diffusing here. And then let's make systemic capillaries, tissue again here. So this cell, on this side, I am gonna make the systemic capillaries. Systemic capillaries has a red blood cell here, and then they give the oxygen here. This cell use oxygen. When oxygen broken down, they produce carbon dioxide and water. So now this oxygen coming from pulmonary capillaries through the systemic capillaries, then these cells are using, they are producing carbon dioxide, and then carbon dioxide again here in the systemic veins joins the superior inferior vena cava and brings to the right atrium again. So exchange of gas here is external respiration or internal respiration?
External.
External respiration. And exchange of gas here in the tissue is internal respiration. So here in the pulmonary capillaries, what happened? From the alveoli, the oxygen is reaching the capillaries, and from the capillaries, carbon dioxide is getting into the alveoli. And here is just opposite, okay? So gas exchange in the lungs, gas exchange in the lungs, particularly in the alveoli, is facilitated by enormous surface area of alveoli, because each alveoli is the balloon-like structure. And another facility here is the distance between the alveolar space and the capillary space is very little. There is only 2 cell thick space, and that is called respiratory membrane. And we talked about that membrane in the first lecture. And these network of capillaries and the thinner wall between the gases facilitate the diffusion of gases, okay? Okay, so what happens here again back? So let's see in the how much carbon dioxide can diffuse from pulmonary capillaries into the alveoli till they maintain the equilibrium. That means the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the capillary and in the alveoli try to do equal. Then it stops. Otherwise, there will be exchange of the gases. Same thing with the oxygen. Okay. So when blood and alveolar air are at equilibrium, the amount of O2 in blood reaches at maximum value. So till they become both sides equal, it's like diffusion. You know, if you have the membrane and if you put one side more concentration and another side another less concentration, then diffusion happens till there is equal amount of the concentration on the both side. Okay. So Henry Lodge says that this value depends on. So let's talk about this law later. But what then determines how much oxygen or carbon dioxide can exchange in your alveoli and in your capillaries? That depends on the chemical and physical characteristic of the gases and the membrane structure and the body temperature, because diffusion can be increased with the temperature too. Okay, so Henry Laws says that the value of the equilibrium depends on solubility of oxygen in the blood, and you cannot change it because this is the natural characteristic of gas, which is constant. Temperature of blood, which is your body temperature, 37 degree centigrade or 97 degree Fahrenheit, that you cannot change either. And then partial pressure of O2. So if you are keeping one partial pressure, it will be constant too, but you can increase and decrease the partial pressure. For example, if you go in the height, you reduce partial pressure. If you put a machine which has pressurized machine and put into your mouth and give the pressure air, that can increase the pressure in your lungs. That's why in the ICU, what we do, if the patient cannot ventilate itself, then we give ventilator to give increased pressure oxygen. Okay. So the amount of O2 dissolved in blood depends directly on its partial pressure, which varies with altitude. Let's see here. In this table 16.5, effect of altitude on partial pressure of oxygen, and then how much blood, how much oxygen is in the air, how much is getting into your alveoli, and how much from alveoli is getting into your pulmonary capillaries, and then how much it is getting into your arterial blood. So we're going to measure the concentration, partial pressure of oxygen in different level. So let's see one example here. At sea level, like Fisherman Wharf in San Francisco, 760 millimeter of mercury. PO, partial pressure of oxygen in air, is around 159. Partial pressure in alveoli is 105 because we mix with we diffuse inside through the alveoli. And then what happens in the artery? Partial pressure when it carried oxygen in your blood, in arterial blood, not the venous blood, arterial blood, you have 100. And this is the oxygen saturation we usually measure when we measure, like finger, you put the finger with the machine and check oxygen saturation, you are measuring this one. But at the height increase, let's see Boreal on Sierra Nevada, which is around 6,000 feet or 4,000 feet. Look, from 760, it is almost 100 millimeter of mercury drop pressure in that 4,000 feet. And so does everything. And by then, you have oxygen only 85 in your artery. And that can Some people can start feeling the lack of oxygen. How we maintain easily that in that time? There is other systems where there is unloading and loading capacity increase, some certain other hormones increase, and that happens maintained. Okay. Here is the highest mountain peak in the world, 30,000 feet, which is Mount Everest. Do you guys know where is Mount Everest?
Himalayas,
Himalayas. Which country?
India, Nepal.
Yeah, it is Nepal, not India, not
Isn't
China.
isn't it the border?
Yeah, that's the border, but it is part of Nepal.
Oh, okay.
So at that highest mountain you see here, if you don't get take a tank of gas, your saturation is like 19. Even the base camp is at almost like 15,000. And people like us cannot live there without oxygen. We start feeling sick. Okay. That's why people carry oxygen when they climb mountain. But there are Sherpas, the native of Himalayas in Nepal. There are a lot of guys, Sherpa. One guy has climbed Mount Everest without oxygen 23 times. So you'll say, wow, how? Because they were born here around 15, 20 feet. They have raised a lot of oxygen carrying capacity because of large amount of the red blood cells, their capacity, their 23 GDP hormone, everything, erythropoietin, and their capacity. So they have amazed lungs. They can climb without oxygen. Okay, so let's see now whether our lungs and our heart are working properly or not. Here is the measurement of partial pressure of saturation of your oxygen in your blood. So here is right side of the heart, blue blood, left side of the heart, red blood, oxygenated blood. So let's say start with the left atrium first. Left atrium and left ventricle, systemic arteries, you have partial pressure of oxygen, which is 100, which is after the equilibrium in the alveoli, you have 100. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 40 in the systemic. Okay. Now you are taking this blood, the aorta becomes capillaries, and you have body cells. So inside the body cells needs oxygen. Oxygen is needed for cellular respiration. Let's see your brain cells, your neuron, your skeletal muscle cells, your liver cells, or any fat cells. They need oxygen so that they can make ATP. So from these capillaries, oxygen move inside the cell, inside the cytoplasm, inside the mitochondria. They use it, cellular respiration, and they produce carbon dioxide and water. Both carbon dioxide and water diffuse here back into the capillaries, and then they add carbon dioxide. So from carbon dioxide 40, we have added, so partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 46, and we have used oxygen. So from 100, it is now 40 partial pressure of oxygen. Are you following me? These all hundreds of thousands of veins, joints, and forms the superior inferior vena cava, which drains into right atrium and then into right ventricle. From the right ventricle, pulmonary trunk, carry blood, poor in oxygen, rich in carbon dioxide, and go to alveoli. And you see, because the pressure gradient of oxygen in the alveoli is more compared to the capillaries. That's why oxygen is coming in and carbon dioxide is going in the alveoli. You breathe out and you exhale carbon dioxide. And again, same cycle starts. Okay. So this is That's why if you're breathing properly, that doesn't mean you will have enough oxygen in your body, because your heart must work properly too. If your heart is working and lungs is not working, then still the same problem. That's why you have seen any COPD patient, when they have lungs problem, they have also the heart problem. Okay. Regulation of breathing now. So we have two kinds of breathing. The autonomic breathing, which is happening right now. Without your conscious mind, your body is continuing inspiration and expiration, breathing in and breathing out. Whether you are sleeping or awake, it is always doing, like your heart. And that is called autonomic breathing. And autonomic breathing is the function of autonomic rhythmic center in the medulla oblongata and pons of our brainstem. But if I want, I can increase my breathing, or I can stop for a while. But all the time it is autonomic breathing which is predominant. So let's see, I increase my breathing, but I cannot do long, because after a certain time, what happens? I will be feeling dizzy, and then my autonomic nervous system stop it. If I hold, I can hold, but autonomic nervous system will prevail. So that is two kinds of breathing. So autonomic breathing is regulated by the autonomic respiratory center in the brainstem, and voluntary breathing is controlled by your cerebral cortex. And how they regulate it, the summary I'm telling, so it is not hard for you to later understand how they regulate it. What is the, like, do you know the homeostasis? There is sensor, stimulus, and then integrating center and effector. So it is carbon dioxide in your blood, and carbon dioxide makes hydrogen ion. So it is carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion ultimately, which activates, if they are increased, the receptors, which are called chemoreceptor in the body. They are found in the medulla oblongata and in the neck, in carotid arteries. And they take sensation to your brain, and then brain makes this determination, integrating center, and then motor, autonomic motor neuron comes to your diaphragm and external intercostal muscle through the spinal cord, and you breathe it. But when you want, by your will, to increase or decrease breathing, then motor neuron come from your brain, cerebral cortex, to the spinal cord and to these muscles, and you increase and decrease the breathing. That's how regulation of breathing happens. So let's see and see them. Okay. So autonomic breathing is generated by rhythmicity center in the medulla oblongata. Here is the medulla oblongata, and we have rhythmicity area in the medulla oblongata. This medulla oblongata consists of two kinds of neurons: inspiratory neuron and expiratory neuron. Inspiratory neuron drive inspiration, and expiratory neuron inhibits the inspiratory neurons. So they are like antagonizing to each other. Their activity varies in reciprocal way, and maybe due to pacemaker neuron. So these neurons are pacemaker neurons here in the medulla oblongata. Okay. Why we call them pacemaker neurons? Because they can, like SA node in the heart, they can generate their action potential by itself, and they can continue as a cycle. And it starts at the very beginning of your conception of life during the fetus. Okay. Then the activity of this medullary center function are influenced by respiratory center in the pons. Pons has also, you see, two respiratory center. They are called pneumotaxic center and the apnestic center. And together, these all is called brainstem respiratory center. So what they do, apnestic center promote inspiration, by stimulating the rhythmicity center, particularly the inspiratory neuron in the medulla. Whereas pneumotaxic center, which is here, antagonize apneustic center, antagonize this center and inhibit the inspiration. That's how this brainstem respiratory center regulate autonomic breathing. But these nuclei are the modified neurons. They respond to increase in carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion. Okay, so this is the summary diagram of the regulation of the breathing. So here you go. Here is cerebral cortex, frontal particularly. You have medulla oblongata. So from cerebral cortex, voluntary breathing is directly, the motor neuron comes from there to the spinal cord and then to the motor neurons to the respiratory muscles like external intercostal and diaphragm. But autonomic breathing, when it responds to increase carbon dioxide, the apneustic center, pneumotaxic center from the pons regulate medullary center in the medulla oblongata, and they get response from chemoreceptor. Chemoreceptors are the receptor which detect hydrogen ion, and they are found in the aortic and carotid bodies, which are found in the common at the junction of common carotid and aorta. Chemoreceptor, which is central chemoreceptor found in the medulla oblongata, they also detect the increase in carbon dioxide, and they give autonomic motor neuron to the spinal cord and then to the brain. Okay, to the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles. Okay, you can see here the central chemoreceptor and peripheral chemoreceptor. So peripheral chemoreceptors are here. Aortic bodies, which is found in the arcs of aorta, they are the spatial neurons there. And then there are chemoreceptor in the medulla oblongata, which is not shown here. There is aortic bodies, carotid bodies. These two are peripheral chemoreceptor. The central chemoreceptors are in the medulla here. Okay, so these, let's see, if I hold your nose, if you hold your nose for 1 minute, what happens? There is more carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide dissolved in water, forms hydrogen ion, and they are detected by these carotid bodies. And then sensory neuron is taken to the brain. And same time, the same carbon dioxide also goes to the brain, and then in brain, spinal, the medulla oblongata, central chemoreceptor also detect the hydrogen ion. And we will talk about that. Once they detect, they drive the respiration from there. Okay. So effect of blood PCO2 and pH on ventilation. When you have increased carbon dioxide in your body, you want to exhale. That's why you ventilate faster. That is called hyperventilation. So chemoreceptor modify ventilation to maintain a normal CO2 and O2 and pH levels. So partial pressure of carbon dioxide is most crucial because of its effect on blood pH. So let's see if we have this carbon dioxide is increased. Let's see, this carbon dioxide is increased here due to obstruction to the breathing. Then what happens? You may form more carbonic acid. And this carbonic acid then forms a lot of hydrogen ion. And this hydrogen ion increase the pH of your blood. And they also form bicarbonate ions. So if this is a condition, or if there is increased hydrogen ion concentration, what does your body do? They try to hyperventilate. And that hyperventilation then causes low carbon dioxide because you exhale it. That is called hypocapnia, because it will cause decrease in concentration of carbon dioxide in your blood, and that is called hypocapnia. But if you hypoventilate, then what happens? You increase carbon dioxide, and then increased carbon dioxide is called hypercapnia. Okay. So again, how about respiratory system? Let me connect a little bit here. There are two systems and two organs in the body which maintains our blood pH. And blood pH is 7.35 to 7.45. And pH is always the measurement of hydrogen ion in a solution. Two organs, kidney and the lungs, maintain blood pH within that normal range so that enzymes in our body, in our cells can function. Okay. If body produce a lot of hydrogen ion, then kidney wants to excrete it, or through the respiration, you want to exhale more carbon dioxide. And so you want to maintain the blood pH. So here, let's see if somebody has decreased ventilation. When your body is functioning normal, and then you have decreased ventilation. How our body maintain it normally? Decreased ventilation means you are increasing the arterial partial pressure of carbon dioxide. That means more carbon dioxide is dissolved in water, forming more hydrogen, and that is reducing the blood pH. That is detected by chemoreceptors in aortic and carotid bodies. And those bodies are connected to sensory neurons. Those sensory neurons' actions then goes to respiratory center in the medulla oblongata. Okay. And then medulla oblongata sends motor neuron to the spinal cord, respiratory muscles, external intercostal and diaphragm, increase ventilation, and you wash out carbon dioxide and you reduce the pressure of carbon dioxide. And that's how you maintain the homeostasis of carbon dioxide in body normally. But the hydrogen ion cannot cross the blood-brain barrier in the brain. Are you following me? So blood-brain barrier is the tight junction between the endothelial cells of the blood vessel and the food process of astrocyte in the brain. Do you remember that? That's
Yeah.
called blood-brain barrier. So blood-brain barrier does not allow carbon dioxide, hydrogen ion to diffuse easily. Okay, so what happens? Increase carbon dioxide then passes through the blood-brain barrier, get into your CSF and in the interstitial fluid. And then in the interstitial fluid, they become hydrogen ion because there is water too. And then they affect chemoreceptor in the medulla oblongata. And the respiratory center again, make the decision, send the motor, and same pathway. So only thing is, so looking at here, which one is the most important factor in inhibiting or stimulating the respiratory center for the drive of breathing? It is carbon dioxide. It is not a hydrogen ion. Because if you put, let's say, if I put some hydrogen ion in your blood, that will activate so much only the peripheral chemoreceptor. But it is central chemoreceptor, which is the major drive of breathing. So it is carbon dioxide, which detects by the central chemoreceptor indirectly in the form of hydrogen ion. That's why it is carbon dioxide which maintains, stimulate mainly the respiratory center of the body. Okay. Brain chemoreceptors are responsible for greatest effect on ventilation. Hydrogen ion cannot cross blood-brain barrier, but carbon dioxide can, which is why it is monitored and has greatest effect. Instead of hydrogen ion, we monitor carbon dioxide, partial pressure of carbon dioxide in blood to see the drive of ventilation. Rate and depth of ventilation adjusted to maintain arterial PCO2 of approximately 40 millimeter of mercury. Peripheral chemoreceptor do not recept to partial pressure of carbon dioxide, only to hydrogen ion levels. Okay. Effect of blood PO2 on ventilation, not much. It is carbon dioxide which stimulates your brain to increase the respiration. Oxygen has very low effect. It must drop almost half of the partial pressure, like half of the partial pressure of arterial PO2 should be like 50 millimeter of mercury. By then, patient will die. There will be a lot of problem if you have 50 partial pressure of oxygen to stimulate your breathing. So it is not a big driver for the ventilation. Emphysema is a chronic obstructive pulmonary disease which blunts chemoreceptor response to PCO2. So emphysema reduce. That's why in emphysemic patient or COPD patient, we never give pure oxygen. Do you know why? Because oxygen can go to the tissue, works, but it will not drive the natural breathing. So what we do, we mix always carbon dioxide and oxygen, and then we give to the patient with COPD. Okay, so the oxygen is inside the blood, but inside the blood, how it is carried? It is hemoglobin, which mainly carry the oxygen. So, okay, oxygen transport. But oxygen is purely water soluble. So it is dissolved in water and it is carried by water too. But only the oxygen with the hemoglobin go to the tissue, okay? Hemoglobin and O2 transport. Loading of Hb with O2 occurs in lungs, unloading in tissues. Affinity of Hb for O2 change with number of physiological variables, okay? So there are other conditions, other gases, other partial pressure, other hormones inside which determines. So in the hemoglobin, you have done here, there is heme, and inside the heme, you see this large complex carbon compound is the heme. And in the center of the heme, there is ferrous iron. And this ferrous iron combined with, get the electron, combined with oxygen, get and that carry the oxygen, okay? So each hemoglobin has 4 hemoglobin or globin polypeptide, and they have, each has heme, so there is 4 heme group. Each heme has ferrous iron that can bind 1 O2. So 1 hemoglobin carry 4 O2s. So what determines how much the oxygen can be transported? So here you go. This is the plasma and this is whole blood. In the plasma, you have partial pressure of oxygen is 100 because it is dissolved in plasma too. In whole blood, it is also partial pressure of 100. But a lot of they are bound with the hemoglobin, okay? So oxygen content of our blood is 0.3 ml O2 per 100 ml in the plasma and 20 ml O2 per 100 ml, which is oxyhemoglobin bind to hemoglobin. So most of the oxygen carried in our body is by hemoglobin, okay? Some of the iron are in ferric form, and that called methemoglobin. They don't carry oxygen, so they lacks electron to bind with O2, and blood normally contains small amount of that kind, not a lot. Carboxyhemoglobin is heme combined with carbon monoxide, and carbon monoxide affinity to the hemoglobin is almost like 210 times than oxygen. So let's see, in a room, if I have 50% 100% oxygen and only 50% or 10% carbon monoxide, your blood will first, your hemoglobin will first bind with carbon monoxide and replace all the oxygen. So your tissue will not get oxygen. That's why carbon monoxide poisoning kills people easily. Okay. Hemoglobin O2 transport, O2 carrying capacity of blood depends on its hemoglobin levels. If you have more, then it is polycythemia. If you have less, then it is anemia. And in case of anemia, you are carrying less oxygen. That's why you feel all the time like tired. Polycythemia is a lot of blood vessels. They carry a lot of oxygen, but sometimes they are thicker blood, so they block the artery and can cause another problem. HB production is controlled by the erythropoietin because it is the hormone which guides red blood cell production. And erythropoietin is increased from your kidney by low partial pressure of oxygen. HB levels in men are higher compared to female because of testosterone, and that's why there is more RBC production in male. High PO2 of lungs favors loading, and low PO2 in tissues favors unloading of O2, which we have talked about. Ideally, HbO2 affinity should allow maximum loading in lungs and unloading in tissues. Okay, if there is no carbon monoxide. Where do you get most of the carbon monoxide? Where do you get most of the carbon monoxide? Guys, have you heard about carbon monoxide poisoning?
In the cars?
Yeah.
Old cars. So there are in US, like every year there is several times newborn or young baby died in behind in the rear seat, because if somebody is driving long route with an old car which is smog test is so, and if you keep the baby on the back and drive like 6 hours continuously, the carbon monoxide mostly goes back in the seat, and baby will inhale, their red blood cell will, hemoglobin will bind with carbon monoxide, and slowly oxygen will replace, and it does not cause pain. So baby will be like sleeping, their brain will be suppressed, and dead. In poor countries where there is no electricity, last time that happened in Texas too. Like there is no electricity and it's cold. So what do? You burn wood or coal, and if they are burning partially, in complete combustion, they produce carbon monoxide. And if you are sleeping in that heat, then slowly carbon monoxide binds with your hemoglobin, suppress your brain, and people die unconscious. They don't even feel the death or pain. Okay, so that is the transport of oxygen. Carbon dioxide is transported also dissolved in blood, in plasma, that is 10%, and bind with hemoglobin, which is 20%. Most of them is bicarbonate ions. So all the carbon dioxide in plasma bind with water, forms bicarbonate. And then when needed, again, they bind and makes carbon dioxide. So most of the carbon dioxide is in the form of bicarbonate ions, 70%. In RBC, carbonic anhydrase catalyze formation of H2CO3 and from carbon dioxide and H2O. So we're going to talk about this in the lab today, how our body makes the hydrogen ion and how lungs and kidney maintain the pH. Okay, that's all for today. So let's go for the lab today. And if you guys have questions, join the office hour today. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Shah.
Thank you.
you,
Bye-bye.
Dr. Shah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.